Welcome to Lawyer Like an Athlete podcast.
Welcome back to Lawyer Like an Athlete podcast with Dr. Amy Wood. I'm Lisa Mosby, your host. Amy is a licensed psychologist, executive coach, and ABA published author who works closely with law firms and high-performing attorneys to examine how culture and professional norms shape sustainable excellence. In this episode, we explore why elite performance depends on the ecosystem surrounding the individual. Welcome, Amy. I am so excited for this conversation. This is just fascinating to me.
Yeah, it is pretty fascinating. I love all of it.
You know, Amy, you argue that environment shapes behavior more than willpower alone. What does that mean in context of a law firm or legal workplace?
Well, what it means a couple of things. Number one is, you can be at work and it may be an environment you're not crazy about. Maybe it's just not a pleasing environment to you. It's not a motivating place to be. It could be more than just the actual physical space. Maybe you don't like the people you work with. Maybe there's too much pressure, whatever it is. You don't feel comfortable and totally alive and energized when you're in that space. And we can say, oh, but with willpower, you should be able to do your job. But environment is really important too, just in terms of the space you're in, how it looks, how it feels. So for some people, not everyone, but some people need to have their space decorated a certain way to feel good in it. Like some people must have light, natural light to feel good at work. Or some people want something on their desk, like a fresh plant or a bouquet of flowers to feel energized, or they want inspiring artwork on the wall to feel like they can be at their best. And other people don't care about that. Other people are fine working, just in a bare looking workplace with not much decoration under fluorescent lights. And that's one way to look at it. And most people, by the way, prefer to be in an environment that's pleasing to them and motivating. But then the other thing that environment encapsulates is, of course, people and the culture that you're working in, regardless of how it actually looks. So you can work in a beautiful office and not be motivated there because it's toxic in terms of the leadership or how people are treated there, how people get along, the level of competition, the level of pressure. So it's really a two-part thing. When we're talking about ecosystem, it's about the culture of the place where you're working, and it's about what you individually need in your surroundings to perform at a high level.
Just out of curiosity, would you say that the people one outweighs the environment? I think culture and how you get along with your mates, your employees, makes so much more of a difference than just having a beautiful space.
I would agree with that distinction. And I've had a number of clients come to me who work in places that aren't that nice, with people they like. And so they can overlook the fact that, hey, it's not a beautiful office. I don't have a view or whatever it is. But then there are people that can work in absolutely amazing aesthetics, in terms of how the office looks and, where the address is and everything else. And they're miserable because they're working with people who they don't like. So I think that it's a lot easier to say, I don't really like the look of my office, but you know what? I like the people here, rather than the other way around. Actually isn't even possible long term, no matter how beautiful your office is and how well you've appointed it, to do your best work if you're working with people who aren't really aligned with your value system and you just don't feel comfortable with them.
Yeah. And I know high performers often assume they can outwork a dysfunctional system. Why doesn't discipline alone override a draining ecosystem?
Well, because this goes back to the fact that we're all human beings. And, many attorneys are very, very self-sufficient, very independent, and they can work in isolation and think that they don't need to interact with others to do well at their jobs. But then what we see from those attorneys who at first seem to be putting out a lot of really excellent work is that over time, if they're not in a place where they have social connections and they don't feel supported and don't feel like where they work is aligned with their value system, they start to become depleted and start to make mistakes and start to feel sick. And I mean, not physically and mentally. Maybe they start to have sleep issues. Maybe they even develop addictions to cope with its dysfunctional environment, because they're not getting what I call that social vitamin, which is something we all need as human beings in order to thrive. So I've seen a lot of attorneys who say, yeah, I work in a silo and I'm totally isolated and I don't need to get involved with all the terrible politics where I work. And I see them getting burnt out eventually because you can only do that for so long.
And social environments influence how we interpret stress, setbacks, and success. What shifts when someone intentionally curates who they listen to and engage with on a daily basis?
Well, that's a really good question, and there's a lot of power here. When you look at the people you're interacting with, especially at work, where you don't always have a say in who you spend your time with. I mean, in social situations, you can say, I don't want to hang out with those people, unless they're people you have to see, let's say at a family gathering a few times a year or at a community event if you don't like to sit with a neighbor. But when it comes to work, all of us, no matter what we do, there's always going to be someone we don't like that we have to interact with. And so you have to minimize it. And, I could use an example from my own life to illustrate what I'm talking about here. When I was in graduate school, a lot of people were always anxious and, very worried they weren't going to get through graduate school. They were overtired. They weren't feeling positive, and they would all get in a group in the student lounge and just start complaining about all of this, like, I'm never going to find a job. I'm never going to be able to graduate. This is so hard. I wish I hadn't done this. And I finally realized, it doesn't make sense for me to participate. I often would be listening to this. I would really contribute. But I finally decided I don't want anything to do with these people. I don't want to get into these discussions because I would leave those discussions feeling anxious, feeling a little bit depressed, losing my hope, which I needed to get through a rigorous program. So it's the same thing for attorneys and for any kind of professional. When you're around people listening to low morale kind of talk, um, excessively, it begins to affect your mood. And so I tell attorneys a lot, you do have to deal with people who are difficult in this field, upset clients, and you have to deal with adversarial judges and opposing attorneys and all kinds of challenging interpersonal situations. But look for areas where you can limit those interactions when you can. And what I mean is, if you're just engaging in small talk with someone who's draining, we could say, I have to go. You can change the topic. There are some people that you can't do that with. Like if you're dealing with a judge who's very demanding, you can't just say, I don't want to talk to you. You have to get through that. So we all have to be resilient in our work when it comes to dealing with people we don't particularly like, who are stressful to us. But there are many, many opportunities everywhere we go to limit conversations, to limit exposure to people who drag us down or ask too much from us, or just take away from our focus and our optimism.
So, Amy, it's common that isolation happens, especially at high levels in the law office. What does isolation quietly erode that people don't immediately notice?
Well, we've talked about the social vitamin aspect. The great thing, of course, about getting promoted is that you make more money, you feel more accomplished, you may be doing more interesting high level work. But one thing that most people experience when they get to higher and higher levels is they have less people they can have camaraderie with, less people that they can talk to honestly. So if you're a leader in a law firm, you can't tell people you're reading how you really feel about certain things. You can't commiserate with them as you used to when you were part of that group. So that isolation can cause a number of issues. One is you don't always have someone to vent to. You don't always have someone to discuss ideas with. And maybe if you're too isolated, you can start to lose touch with reality, where you get so in your head about things that you may start to become excessively anxious, for example. You may feel excessively separate from other people. So that's a real problem. So, as I said, a lot of attorneys do work in isolation, and they're very comfortable with that, and that can be a good thing, to be very independent and self-sufficient. But you still need to have other people to talk to. You still need to find ways to connect. And for those people at high levels, what's really important is to find a group of like-minded people where you can be yourself, and you can gain support and talk about things that you can't reveal to the people you're leading. So like mastermind groups, where you have a leader who you meet with and everybody shares ideas and they all support each other. Or just, finding a group of colleagues that you meet with casually and have fun with once in a while. But really, really important to work at that as you move up, in an organization. But also, if you are in that situation I described earlier, where maybe you work in a beautiful office building, but you're surrounded by people you don't particularly align with, then you've really got to work hard outside of work to find people, maybe through professional organizations or through recreational activities, where you're around people and can have that sense of support and camaraderie.
So, on top of isolation comes competitive culture. And I know that can drive excellence, but they can also amplify insecurities. How do you tell the difference between a challenging ecosystem and a corrosive one?
Well, in a challenging ecosystem, I think it may be very competitive, but people are supported and encouraged to be their best. I'm seeing this a lot in law schools. I do a lot of speaking these days, with law schools, because they want their students to be trained in how to be a happy and healthy attorney. So they don't start their careers, and immediately get drawn into a toxic workaholism culture. And what I have noticed in law schools, yeah, they're highly, highly competitive, but the smart law schools are saying, yeah, it's important to be competitive. And this may be the hardest work you've ever done to get through law school. But we also have to be a team. We also have to support each other and not be working against each other. And so you can have both. You can have someone who is very competitive, but in a collaborative way, where people are competitive in terms of trying to keep an edge, trying to do really, really well with their work and trying to, um, reach new heights with whatever they do. But they can also cheer on other people who are trying to do that too. And they can also, and this is the best part, they can also join forces and work more as a partnership or as a team to get things done more quickly. And I think, there are a lot of organizations outside the legal field right now who are really in tune with that and working more in a team like way, because they understand that helps people to feel more energized and motivated. And it also moves everybody up in terms of their ability to come up with great ideas and execute those ideas. And I think that some law firms are starting to do this, but a lot of them are still pretty immersed in that toxic competitive culture, which is a negative thing, like competing against each other and trying to outdo each other.
Amy, if someone can't immediately change their firm's culture, what aspects of their ecosystem are still within their control?
Well, I think the one thing that is really in everyone's control, and I always suggest that attorneys start here, is just in your workspace. Taking a look around and asking, how can I make this workspace work more for me? Meaning, what would help me to feel like I want to feel when I'm in my workspace? So it could be getting rid of clutter. That's always a good place to start, because clutter causes stress. When we look around our workspace, if we see dirty dishes from breakfast out in the afternoon, or we see garbage that we haven't taken out and it's overflowing, or we see a stack of professional journals that we've been wanting to get to for years and we've never gotten to. And every time we look at that stack, we're reminded that we're running behind. There's all kinds of ways to look at that. It could be the color of the walls. It could be the things you have on your walls. Look around and ask, what can I remove first of all to make this environment a better place to be. And when you're at work, that means to be more focused, to be really, really sharp mentally, to be really comfortable. So it's also about ergonomics, making sure you have really good setup in terms of the furniture you're using and the lighting you have. So asking those questions, getting rid of what's not working. And that could be as simple as maybe, you got a picture that you put up in your office 5 years ago that you loved. And every time you looked at it, you felt inspired. And now you're just tired of looking at it. So maybe that goes and you say, what do I want to bring in to make this a better environment for me? And this is an area of control that every attorney, no matter where you're working, you have some degree of flexibility here. You have that control and may not be using it fully. So that's one thing you can always do if you can't change your firm's culture. And then the other thing would be to try to get out, especially for lunch. I know a lot of attorneys say they don't have time to take lunch, but when you do make the time, it really pays off because you come back from lunch feeling revived and refreshed and better able to do the rest of their day's work. So getting away from that culture when you can, minimizing exposure to the most toxic aspects of that culture when you can. You don't have to participate in everything. So looking at the things you can say no to and doing other things that are more appealing to you. Like not going to meetings unless you absolutely have to be there, for example.
It makes me think of going outside at lunchtime. Even if you can't go out for lunch or go to a restaurant, sometimes the best thing for me is that peacefulness of finding a secret hiding spot around the building where nobody walks and
Right.
having just
Yes, I
15
agree with
minutes.
you.
Like I feel like a new woman when I come back in. And these things seem so simple. They really do seem so simple, but ultimately it shifts everything in your life when someone begins to cultivate a healthier performance environment. What changes first, actually? Energy, resilience, clarity, or something else?
Well, I think probably the first thing is just your mindset when you do something small to shift your environment. So the example I gave of,
Mm.
just getting rid of the clutter, you said, I'm going to take 5 minutes, set a timer, and just get rid of anything in my office that doesn't belong there. That's going to give you an immediate lift. So it's going to boost your mood and help you to be more positive, to see things more clearly, maybe to be more creative, more imaginative. And it only takes like 5 minutes to make that happen. Um, you mentioned resilience, and resilience is something that we develop over time. And it's all about, if I had to distill it down, it's all about letting go what you can't control and taking control of what you can control. So the more that you take control of your environment, the more you're going to see change. The more you create an environment for yourself that actually is squeezing and energizing and all that, the more you'll actually see those results. And then what you'll notice, oh, I feel a little more positive today, or I feel like I have a little more fuel today. I feel more hopeful about how the day is going to go. Oh, I found that task I usually dread easy to get through. I did it more quickly than usual. You notice those small things. And then over time, what you'll notice when you make these environmental changes with your actual physical office setting and the people you spend time with and what you do in the breaks, etc. You'll notice over time that you're sleeping better, you're getting more done in less time as a regular thing, not just occasionally. You have a better attitude. You're able to regulate your emotions more because you're not experiencing as dramatic emotions as you used to when you weren't moderating your environment well. So all of those things that I just mentioned, all of that over time leads to the resilience, a feeling of control that comes from saying, where can I take charge? I can take charge of not interacting with negative people. I can take charge of making sure to get outside a couple times a day, even for a few minutes, and breathe and look up at the sky, which does wonders for our mindset. And the more we're outside, the more our physical health and mental health improve. So there are so many benefits. And, I can't say enough that making these changes in our environment to the extent that we have, you will see immediate impact, but you've got to keep doing this. So if you say, okay, I'm going to get rid of the clutter in my office, then the next thing is to set up ways of making sure that clutter does not build up again, so that you don't end up in this cycle of clutter builds up, I feel depleted, I get rid of the clutter, I feel good, because then you're just going from one extreme to the other.
One last thing, Amy, how do we find your book?
My book, Lawyer Like an Athlete, you can find on the ABA website, aba.org, in their bookstore, and you can order it online from Amazon, or any bookstore can order it for you.
Very good. This has been an excellent conversation. I have to tell you, it lifted my energy and my spirits and my mood. Just, fantasizing in my world, what would that look like? What can I change? And I love plants. I love plants. So I think we should challenge those that are listening today. Take a look around your office, see what you can do to just shift that energy in your room. See how you can improve it, make it better with something simple.
Yeah, great advices, and start small. You just take a minute and change one thing in your office and see what happens.
For sure. Thanks so much for your time today. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisa.
That wraps up today's episode of Lawyer Like an Athlete podcast. If this conversation made you reconsider the environment you're training in, you can learn more about Dr. Amy Wood and her work, including her book, Lawyer Like an Athlete, at amywoodpsyd.com. If you know someone trying to out-discipline a draining system, send this episode their way. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.